Welcome to this explainer. Right now, or maybe sometime this weekend, you might be planning to just kick back and have a casual drink. A beer, a glass of wine, whatever your preference is. And you'll probably just drink it, enjoy it, and totally forget about it. But the truth is, what you're doing is engaging in literally one of the oldest activities a human being can possibly do. It is older than the invention of the wheel, it's older than writing, and, shockingly, it is significantly older than farming. So today we're going entirely back to our roots to look at the wild history of alcohol.
So, when did we actually start drinking? Well, our standard assumption is that our relationship with alcohol started, a few thousand years ago? Maybe with the invention of wine in some ancient Mediterranean village, or the very first crude brewery, but that assumption is completely wrong. To find the real answer, we have to challenge everything we know, because our relationship with alcohol actually predates human beings entirely.
To figure this out, we're tracing a massive timeline today to see how the desire for a drink shaped human history. We'll be jumping from 10 million years ago to 13,000, 12,000, 9,000, and finally bringing it down to 5,000 years ago.
All right, first up, the drunken monkey hypothesis, taking us back 10 million years.
Picture this. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley published this groundbreaking argument. He suggested that the true origin of drinking didn't start with humans at all. Instead, it started on an African forest floor with a small primate just picking up a piece of fruit that had been sitting on the ground for a little too long. It breaks down into this beautifully simple, wild fermentation process. First, the fruit falls from a tree and sits on the warm ground. Then, the natural sugars inside it start to break down, and wild yeast naturally enters the chat. Fermentation begins entirely on its own, and finally, the fruit starts producing small amounts of ethanol. When our primate ancestors ate that slightly rotten fruit, the ethanol inside gave them a little buzz. Now, they had absolutely zero idea what chemistry was happening, but they knew one thing for sure: it felt really good. So they just kept coming back for more.
The absolutely crucial point here is that evolution built in the taste for alcohol. Over millions of years, our ancestors didn't just casually tolerate this natural ethanol. They evolved to actively seek it out. It actually became a survival advantage because the smell of ethanol helped them locate calorie-dense food. So, by the time actual ancient humans finally showed up on the evolutionary tree, the taste for alcohol was already hardwired into our biology. The urge was there way before we ever figured out how to make a drink on purpose. Jumping forward to Section 2, brewing before farming began, roughly 13,000 years ago. Fast-forwarding to about 13,000 years ago, we're looking at a group called the Natufian people. At an archaeological site called Raqefet Cave in Israel, archaeologists made a massive discovery. They found these 13,000-year-old rock mortars carved directly into the bedrock of the cave. And when scientists analyzed the residue left deep inside those ancient stone bowls, they found traces of wheat and barley that had been deliberately soaked, germinated, and left to ferment. What they found was quite literally beer, brewed in a cave 13,000 years ago. Now, here's the shocking plot twist. The Natufian people were not farmers. They hadn't even invented agriculture yet. They were still nomadic hunter-gatherers, just collecting wild grain by hand.
This discovery completely shatters our historical assumptions. Up until this cave discovery, the old theory basically went like this. Humans settled down, started farming, built permanent villages, and then eventually discovered fermentation as a happy byproduct of having extra grain. But the new theory, backed by this groundbreaking evidence, flips that entirely. These people were brewing beer while they were still completely nomadic. They didn't grow the barley, they foraged for it. Why? Because making beer was so incredibly important to them that they figured out brewing before they figured out farming.
Which leads us to Section 3. Did beer build civilization? Let's look at 12,000 years ago.
About 1,000 years after those cave brewers, someone in southeastern Turkey built something absolutely massive at a site called Göbekli-Tepe. Just look at that number, 10 tons. Massive stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, were arranged in careful, deliberate circles and beautifully carved with images of animals. Now keep in mind, this whole complex structure was built before pottery, before anyone in the region had a permanent home, and well before farming. These were still nomadic hunter-gatherers. For years, archaeologists were totally baffled. What could possibly motivate nomadic people to organize the immense back-breaking labor needed to drag 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with such precision?
Well, the missing piece of the puzzle came when they discovered large stone vats right there at the site. When they tested the insides of these vats, they found chemical traces of fermented grain. People were brewing at Göbekli Tepe, and not just in small batches either. They were making enough for massive gatherings. This strongly suggests the site wasn't a home at all. It was a central gathering place for massive ritual and feasting. People traveled all across the region, came together, and drank.
This brings us to a really fascinating quote from Patrick McGovern, who is essentially the world's leading expert on ancient alcohol. He says, "Humans didn't start farming to make bread, they started farming to make beer." And it makes perfect logical sense when you really think about it. Bread requires a highly complex process: grinding, kneading, and baking. But beer? Beer is so much simpler. You just soak the grain in water, leave it alone, and let the natural magic of fermentation happen. McGovern's theory is that the intense desire to drink together was a far stronger motivator to finally settle down and plant crops than the desire to eat grain in the form of bread.
Moving into Section 4, the world's oldest recipes 9,000 years ago.
We are moving forward in time to 7000 BCE, or roughly 9,000 years ago, to a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China. This is the era where brewing really shifts from a happy accident into a deliberate, highly sophisticated craft. Here, archaeologists uncovered ancient pottery jars containing the residue of a deliberately fermented drink. Chemical analysis confirmed exactly what was in it: rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries. This is the oldest confirmed recipe for alcohol anywhere in the world. And notice, it isn't crude or simple. It's a beautifully complex blend. Whoever mixed this up 9,000 years ago knew exactly what they were doing, carefully balancing sweet honey and tart berries to create a really refined beverage.
Section 5. Ancient Egypt's Beer Economy, 5,000 years ago.
By this point in human history, alcohol wasn't just a fun ritual beverage anymore. Alcohol was the literal foundation of an entire empire. 4 to 5 liters. And no, that wasn't how much they drank at a wild weekend party. That was the daily salary for the workers who built the pyramids. They were actually paid in beer. Not in gold, not in coins, not in raw grain, but in 4 to 5 liters of beer every single day. Talk about liquid assets.
This multi-purpose drink made perfect sense for their society. I mean, it was their daily paycheck, sure, but it was also a safe water filter. The water from the Nile was often contaminated, but the brewing process made beer much cleaner and safer to drink, literally keeping the population alive. For a laborer dragging massive limestone blocks in the scorching desert heat, it was a caloric meal, providing essential energy and nutrients. Doctors even used it as a medical prescription, mixing herbs right into it to cure ailments. And finally, it was a sacred prayer offering, believed to be a divine gift created by the god Osiris himself. One single drink was doing the job of money, water, food, medicine, and religion. The whole shebang.
So it all boils down to this. We didn't build civilization and then casually decide to have a drink. We built civilization so we could drink. From 10 million years ago when our ancestors sought out fermented fruit for survival, to 13,000 years ago when nomads brewed in caves, to the construction of the very first massive stone monuments just to host a giant feast. Alcohol didn't come after we built the world we live in. The overwhelming evidence suggests it is the very reason we built it at all. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought. The next time you pour a glass of wine or crack open a cold beer, ask yourself, is your next drink just a 10-million-year-old evolutionary impulse? The process has certainly changed over the millennia, the ingredients have vastly improved, and the cups have definitely gotten a lot fancier. But that core impulse? It's the exact same one that made a small primate reach for a piece of overripe fruit on an African forest floor 10 million years ago. We just finally learned how to make it on purpose. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.